welcome to episode 2 of White Noise Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Ginger Snaps, which is a 2000s coming-of-age film about two sisters, Bridget and Ginger, facing the difficulties of first periods, mean girls, stupid boys, and one of them transforming into a werewolf. Classic girly stuff. It's directed by John Fawcett. Ginger Snaps uses the age-old supernatural tale to explore puberty in a hard-to-ignore way, possibly coming closer to examining the horrors all women eventually face in a more relatable way than any of the more mainstream coming-of-age stories that we've seen since. The bonds of sisterhood are tested as Bridget does all she can to help Ginger as she slowly gives in to the changes taking over her body. And I think that is the best description I can give to anybody who hasn't seen it.
And if you haven't, we highly suggest it.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think like everything that we're going to talk about in these podcasts, definitely recommend seeing the film beforehand. I think it just goes without saying that it just makes it a lot easier to follow, but also you just don't have to worry about us explaining the plot in detail as we go along, because we're most likely not going to do that.
And also, we wouldn't talk about films that we ourselves don't enjoy. That would be a rarity. And we'd probably recommend seeing almost every single film that we do talk about.
Most likely.
Yeah.
I think if we ever do a film that we don't like, it will be to tell you not to watch it, but then I feel like that would be counterproductive. So,
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Also, how can you not want to watch a film that has the emo style that Ginger Snaps does?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's really, really prominent that this film came out literally in the year 2000. Like I said 2000s, but it came out in the first year of the noughties. For so many reasons that's relevant. It was the turn of the new millennium. It was the beginning of the emo culture, which is very, very highlighted throughout this film.
In every way it possibly could be.
So Lyanna watched it, as she'll explain, a lot longer ago than I did. I didn't see this film until last night. I had heard about it before, but I hadn't actually seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was watching it, Lyanna messaged me saying it is such a Skye film, and I don't know exactly what that says about me, but I couldn't agree with her more.
I think it's just anything that, like, I don't even know how to describe it. Anything that's slightly emo, a bit noughties, kind of got a feminist undertone, anything like that, and it's a Skye movie, 100%.
Yeah.
It gives me, you know, we mentioned this earlier, if you liked Jennifer's body, you'd probably like this film.
Oh yeah, that's probably the best way.
Yeah,
to sell
definitely.
It. Throughout this entire thing, I could tell how it influenced Jennifer's body, but also
definitely.
how it influenced so many subsequent films that kind of came off the same genre. And I think it's fair enough to say that one of the reasons we've decided to do this film for our second episode is because the first episode was on Raw, and whilst there are quite a lot of differences, like you could almost probably watch these films and without really thinking about it maybe think that they don't have any similarities.
Mm-hmm.
But Ginger Snaps was probably the beginning of this kind of coming of age body horror.
Horror has been used as a lens for other issues for decades, even like since the genre came around before film. But I do think that like Ginger Snaps is like the penultimate example of that. Female adolescence and female sexuality, similar stuff to Raw, which is why I think it would make a really good double feature.
I just think maybe this film, it's very strange, but I think people could relate to it more, because I think we had a very in-depth discussion before we started this recording about how we felt it was almost more personal.
Oh, definitely.
Than Raw was. I think it touched on a lot more intimate subjects than Raw did.
Yes. I also think that the fact that I don't know the exact budget of Raw, but like we just looked it up and the budget for Ginger Snaps was a very small, even for the year 2000, 4.5 mil. So being like a small emo indie film, I feel like of course it was gonna have a more personal touch to it.
I think it's also important to say that, again, because of the year that Ginger Snaps came out, it came out around the time of the Colombian shootings, the school shootings, which faced the film with a lot of controversy when it came out, because obviously, understandably, people didn't want to see teenagers in situations of death or depression or anything like that because of this situation, and I would say that it probably harmed the profit that the film could have made.
Oh no, definitely. It absolutely bombed. It made a
Yeah.
fraction of its budget. And
I mean,
it's the sad reality
yeah.
of a lot of stuff that came out around then. It was just doomed because of the climate, really. Like, obviously you have to be sensitive, but as we've seen, these films don't seem to have an influence that greatly on the people doing these things. If you get where I'm going with that, you get that. Which school shooting was it? They found there was an incident where they found a copy of like Chucky 2. Which one was that?
Was that a school shooting? I don't remember.
I can't remember.
No.
Or it was I think it was the British case with the 2 boys.
It wasn't a school shooting. I remember the Jamie Bulger case.
That was it. Yeah, like I think when the Jamie Bulger case happened, I would say that a lot of British people would be familiar with this. That basically, in that case, one of the boys involved, it was found that he had a copy of Chucky 2 in his home. And obviously this is around the craze of blaming films on violent actions. And I would say that definitely, Ginger Snaps was one of those films that fell victim to it not long after it was released. Like literally it was opened to that climate. So it just suffered, and because of that, it became a cult classic.
Definitely. I mean, I feel like, I don't know if this is a controversial opinion or not, but evil people are evil people.
Yes.
It won't take a lot to push people to do these kind of things. So I think things like Chucky is a little bit debatable because as far as I'm aware, it didn't serve any other purpose other than being a horror film.
Yeah.
But then again, I am a huge believer in, when people talk about video games being prevalent to violence, it's like I probably saw more violence in news articles than I ever saw in video games.
Oh, definitely.
But the thing is with Ginger Snaps is that it has a message beyond the violence that it contains. And then to be fair, but then also, like I said, if you we don't want to go too much in comparing Raw and Ginger Snaps, even though there are obviously the similarities, because we don't want it to basically just be like a partner episode. We do want this episode to stand alone. But the violence in this film is very different to Raw. It's not as explicit, I feel. It's more hinted at. There's a lot more self-restraint when it comes to it.
But I would also say, weirdly, that it kind of revels in it more in a way, if you get me, because this is very clearly much more of a horror. It's like a campy horror film. Like it even opens with a ton of blood, but it's not, because it's less grounded in reality, it seems less like actually horrific.
Well, it's like you just said, like it literally opens, the first scene is with somebody's family dog being mutilated by beast of, I can't remember what they call it now. It's the beast of something, they do call it, but basically it's this animal, at this point we know it as, terrorizing the town that these people live in. And it literally starts with this toddler in a sandbox,
young boy,
and a mom raking the leaves, and she looks over at her son and she notices that he's playing with something. She walks over and he's got blood on his face, and it turns out to be their family dog who has been mutilated.
That sums up the whole film going forward, really.
It does, though, because it's just the destruction of innocence from the get-go.
And I'd also say that sounds so horrifying when you describe it, but in the film it's like the Dutch camera angles and like the kind of like lighting used, it just all gives you more of a campy vibe. Like you're going into this knowing that you're not going to necessarily be like traumatized by it. You're here to have a bit of fun as well.
Oh, definitely. Like there are, I will admit, there are obviously some very graphic images in it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It is mostly of animals, which I will not deny is just as horrific as if it was humans. But as far as I'm aware, it doesn't particularly, until maybe the end, show graphic mutilations of human beings.
Unless you like, there is like obviously the transformation scenes, because I mean at the end of the day this is a werewolf film, but they're not just, you don't get what we usually associate with werewolf transformation scenes, at least now anyway. Like I'd say the film that really created our modern sense of a transformation scene is like An American Werewolf in London. We don't, in this film, obviously to keep it campy, you don't necessarily see Ginger in agony as she transforms, because
the
in
transformation,
this, it's more release, isn't it?
the transformation is more internal.
Yes.
Whereas
Definitely.
American Werewolf in London, I mean, with that film, it was like its biggest selling point was
that scene,
that transformation scene, because it was just transcending of its time. Whereas it's like Ginger Snaps knew at this point that people had been desensitized to an extent of people transforming into werewolves, to a point where now they're romanticized.
Definitely.
So a lot of the transformation that goes on in this film is internal.
Yeah, definitely. And
I think, like you said, it does begin with the first kind of sequence montage, like over the opening credits. There's these pictures of both of the sisters, Bridget and Ginger, doing a school project where they take pictures of each other dying, basically.
Oh my god, yeah. That just says it all, really, about noughties emo as well.
Yeah, like you can't deny, as much as this film did have a message it was trying to punch across, it did fall into the gothic emo look, we're different.
Oh, of course. And
genre, which we can both relate to because we were both a part of it, let's be honest.
And I think you also have to like recognize that was also its fan base. Like, this film was written for those girls that are like, I'm not like the other girls, kind of thing. Like, the main characters, they resent the other girls at school. You know, they are not like other girls. And I don't know, there's just something about this film screams, I really just don't want to be mainstream. Like, fuck the mainstream. And sometimes it is a bit on the nose, and it can be like almost a little bit cringy looking back on. But I think that's also something to super enjoy when you look back on like noughties emo.
I think, like you said, though, like, as much as it is cringy, you could also put it down to campy.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's difficult because, like I said, the first time I watched this film, I went into it with an analytical point of view because I knew we were doing it for the podcast.
Yes.
So I looked past a lot of that to an extent, but I was still able to recognize that it was just, you know, like there's one point where, you know, Ginger and her sister Bridget made a pact when they were younger that it seems like they would either survive together or they would die together.
Yeah.
And Bridget makes a comment of wrists being for women.
Oh god, yeah.
You know, like, the whole idea of suicide is glorified and romanticized, which is
definitely, it's very much a Tumblr film.
Oh yeah.
Like, I'm not gonna lie to you, back in the day I saw a lot of gifs and photo sets of this film on Tumblr. Like, they loved that. They ate that shit up completely. And I can't blame them, because I did in about 2012, because I'm old,
and I did in 2020.
Exactly. So I can't even imagine. Like, imagine how people liked this film in 2000. It makes me sad that it came out in such circumstances, because I reckon it would have actually found a much wider audience. And it actually upsets me that a lot of people haven't heard of this film, because I know I could tell you quite a few people that I know for sure would love this. And that's kind of why we're doing this episode.
Yeah. The first sequence that we were talking about a moment ago, about like the pictures that the sisters took, like, on the surface does just seem like the glorification of death and the romanticization of becoming something after death.
Yeah.
But when you really look at it, to me, a lot of the pictures were taken in domestic situations. And because these were two girls that were creating it, it seemed to me like they were mocking the idea of domestic duties that are put upon women, which you do have to remember, especially back, like I said, in the early 2000s, which was only 1 year away from 1999, that women were still kind of expected to be like that, or if they decided to step outside of the box, they were seen as radical.
Oh, 100%. Like, we tend to forget that. I know there's obviously this whole like amazing thing that you forget how long ago something was, and it is actually very easy to forget that 2 decades ago women were in a very different spot. Like, the I'd say in the past decade or even less, a lot of women have been able to define what being a woman is to them. And I don't think they necessarily had that as a luxury of the same degree 20 years ago. And I think that's like a big thing about emo, because I think whilst it does have its problems for sure, the emo scene tended to be quite welcoming to people that were different, and that included women that didn't enjoy conventional, you know, femininity. And I think that's why a lot of suburban kids loved emo so much.
Yeah, well, emo broke down. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't expect this podcast to be on emo, but I'll take it. Emo broke down a lot of these stereotypical gender norms for men and women. You know, for possibly the first time, men were mainstream wearing makeup. They were wearing women's clothing. They were straightening their hair. Like, as much as you want to make fun of it, for a lot of people, it was a gateway into actually finding who they were later in life, because it gave them a chance to express who they felt like they were inside. And one of the, like, as much as this film, you know, it focuses on female puberty and periods and things like that, Lyanna did make a good point. Like I said, not all women have periods.
No.
And there is this breakdown of exactly what it means to be female. Like, why is it, as this film portrays, do you become a woman when you have your period?
Well, yeah.
When so many cis women have their periods at different stages, and then some women don't have them at all.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that obviously in the film it makes it apparent that Ginger is the older of the two sisters. We find that out very early on in the film. And it's really interesting to me that they go on and on and on about like Ginger being a woman now, but like nothing about Bridget. It's only when she gets her period that she's considered a woman, and that she actually starts to, well, when you think about it, it's suggested that at the beginning of the film, when boys start to pay attention to Ginger, which we'll talk about in a second, it's around the time of her, she's just about to get her first period. It's really interesting to me that it kind of buys into this whole assumption that, like, you know, the hormones and like, I hate it, but you know, sometimes there's that horrible term about like men being able to smell it. Like, it's so uncomfortable, but that's definitely played on in this. Definitely.
I think it also, like, you know, what you were just talking about, one of the scenes that really highlights this is, I dubbed it the first hockey scene, because there are a couple of scenes, hockey scenes in this film. But the first one is when Ginger and Bridget are smoking together, and one of the boys, or all of the boys actually, are just making comments on the girls. They're making very sexualized, stereotypical comments. And I think whilst this film also is a portrayal of female coming of age and puberty, it's also an interesting portrayal of how men are almost expected to act, to be the alpha males, which again is very prevalent in wolves and dogs and things like that, the higher ranking. Men are also almost, in this age at least, again, we do need to remember that this film came out in the 2000s, not that it's an excuse, but it was 20 years ago. That men are brought up to believe that the only way that they could be seen as the alpha males is if they're demeaning kind of everybody else around them, but especially women.
Yeah, like they have to like completely own them. You know, they have to constantly comment on them in every way. They could, like in this film, you see them from the beginning call them freaks, but then they also call Ginger hot. It's like they just can talk about them in any way they want, and that makes them a man. And it's a weird thing to watch now, because obviously it still happens in films now, but like you said in our conversation earlier, in a like coming of age film today, someone would comment on the comments.
Someone would definitely, they would call them out on it. They would basically say like, look, dude, that's not okay.
You're like, fuck you, dude.
It's pretty fucking disgusting. But these men are just left to their own devices, and they're almost kind of allowed to make these comments.
It's funny because it feels kind of creepy to watch, but then it's also like, wait, actually that is normal? I guess because we see it less. I don't know about you, like I don't really get it. Maybe it's because I'm not a stunner or something, but I don't really get all those weird comments. Maybe I live in a different world to other people, but it's it's not as prevalent as it is in movies from the past, and that makes me wonder, is it that we don't want to show it in media anymore, or is it that things are getting better? I'd like to believe that it's because things are getting better, for sure, but I also do think that, I don't know, I don't know if it's that it's shown less in films now because it happens less, or if it's that we show it less in films in an attempt to make people do it less, because, you know, you go back and you watch things like, you know, Carrie or anything from like the 70s, 60s earlier, and the catcalling is really commonplace, but for some reason in this film I noticed it more. I don't know about you.
No, I completely agree. Again, I think it's because it's like I said before, I expected somebody to step in and say something, because I knew it was wrong. But then I do think back to when I was in school, and I think about the situations I had with boys and the way that I was treated because of them, and I didn't say anything because nobody had kind of ever told me that wasn't the way it was meant to be.
It's just normalised, as boys being boys.
Yeah. So I wonder if it's less to do with the fact that, like you said, it happens less now, which I would like to think is the case, or if it's more to do with the fact that when we were that age, during that era, we just didn't question it.
To be fair, I didn't think about it that way. Maybe I just don't remember it so much because I didn't actively think about it.
Like, there's a lot of things later in life I've looked back on, and it's not until I've reached this age that I've questioned and realised that it was wrong and it shouldn't have happened.
Well, yeah, we've been seeing that on Twitter recently, like a lot of people coming forward about experiences. And I think that if more films showed people speak out about it, obviously that would help. Not that Ginger Snaps does, let's be real, but I don't know, I would say that, like, watching this film, you can see how far things have come, thank fuck.
Yeah.
Like, genuinely. And that isn't just with like catcalling and all. I just say it's also with feminism, because, and just general like understanding of gender, because we said earlier that this film does make some outdated assumptions about women, and it's like we said, like, not all women that get periods are cis, you know, and not all cis women get periods. And although we can't judge the film for that because it did come out in a different era, it is important to understand that this film isn't, you know, a monumental piece of feminist film. You get me?
Basically, this film uses the idea of periods and compares it to becoming a werewolf, which is something that we'll get onto a little later.
Yeah.
But despite the fact that it uses the idea of periods to start the discussion of bodies changing, it doesn't mean that it completely disregards the fact that at some point everybody's body does change.
Yes, exactly.
One day you do look in the mirror and you realize you're seeing a completely different person, no matter what gender you are. You do see a completely different person than what you saw in the first place.
I think it's interesting as well that we see Ginger change, and like not just into a full-on werewolf, but like her physical appearance changes a little bit. Like with the, you know, the silver streaks in her hair, which slowly start to show up. I thought that was quite interesting because it's, to other people it could literally just look like hair dye. That's like a normal part of growing up. Like, people experiment with their hair, like nobody even yeah, exactly. And also it just looks fucking cool, but it
does look
yeah, like, I'm not gonna lie, when I watched it I was like, I want silver streaks. But anyway, basically I found it quite interesting that that's just like another example of ways that she's changing, which seem quite insignificant, but it's actually something, it's a sign of something bigger going on inside of her.
I think it was important that they used very obvious physical changes to represent what was going on inside of her.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about before that if this film had just been about basically a girl getting her period, which obviously neither of us are undermining, but if they had just decided to do that, I think people, boys and girls, wouldn't have really thought a lot of it.
No, definitely
because
not.
It's just, again, we all become desensitized to it. We all just become used to that's a thing that happens to our bodies. But then when it actually happens to you, it feels like you're the only person in the entire world that is going through it. We don't all go through it the same way for a lot of reasons, like hormonal reasons, actual medical reasons. And I think this film, intentionally or not, was the beginning of realizing that not everybody goes through the same changes, but that doesn't make them weird or abnormal just because they do. You know, if someone doesn't understand the change that you're going through, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean that it's not normal. It's just the way that your body's deciding to cope with it, or the way that your mind is deciding to cope with it.
It's so interesting, isn't it, that it takes a film with such a dramatic transformation to make a comment on something that should just be talked about more openly, you know? Like, what they literally had to use fucking werewolves to talk about an everyday thing which happens to billions of people across the globe. And it's just, I cannot fathom that it takes something like that to make a film about this. Like we said, we couldn't think of a film just about periods. Like, there are films that, you know, that there's mention of them, like, fuck me, Carrie. That's probably the most famous example. But that film just used it in an opening. Whereas in Ginger Snaps, it plays a bigger role. You get me? And I do love that they used this topic to talk about it, but I genuinely would be interested in seeing a film that is just about periods.
I think with those kind of films, like, off the top of my head, the completely opposite side of the scale, stuff like Angus Thongs and Perfect Snogging, like, it takes the opposite route of girls going through awkward stages and trying to, most of the time it does center around their relationship with boys. And for some people, this is completely relevant because the whole idea of sexual awakening, as is explored in this film, does come along with puberty, no matter which stage or age that you go through it or begin to go through it, because it goes on for a lot longer than people talk about.
Oh god, yeah.
Those kind of films always do center around these girls and how they react around boys, but again, for some people it's not always the case.
No, definitely. Like we said about Raw in our last episode, you don't have to involve men to talk about women. You don't. Like, it's you don't have to compare to make comment. Obviously in Ginger Snaps there's a lot more male characters, and I actually find it interesting that they weren't included just to play off of women, if you get me. Like, you get what I mean. Like,
no, definitely. I mean, like I said, for myself personally, men really haven't been an important point of my life since I was 18.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying that they're not an important point of some people's lives, but for me, like, they haven't, I don't particularly have any thoughts or feelings towards them since that age. And I think this was interesting because in the same way that Raw does, it goes through the idea of sibling relationships again, and the idea of relationships, a younger sister and an older sister, and the younger sister kind of following in her older sister's footsteps.
Yes.
And how for a lot of people, and again, obviously not everybody, but for a lot of people, that's their kind of first introduction to any kind of relationship outside their parents, because your parental relationships, and again, obviously not for everybody, but your parental relationships are something that you almost kind of expect, whereas your sibling relationships can change rapidly throughout your lives. Ginger Snaps is a good portrayal of that because it begins with two sisters who have literally made a pact either to survive or die together. And I think it's made apparent in the first interaction we have with them that Bridget isn't 100% on board with what Ginger's saying. Yeah, it's just that she wants to be with her sister. And I think, again, neither of these girls particularly knows what they want out of life. So they're following the path that they think they should.
They look to each other for guidance. They ostracize themselves from everyone in school. And I would say that is definitely a feeling that you can get at that age, you know, the need to isolate yourselves from other people. And I think what's interesting with this is the fact that it's not just like with a best friend, it is with a sister. Often in films, when there's like a close sibling bond, they wouldn't just be each other's sole friend. But in this, obviously with the allusion to like werewolves and packs, they are like a pack, you know, like their bond is unbreakable. They say that, like you said, they say they'll like live together or die together. They're so incredibly bonded that each decision either of them makes seems to deeply affect the other. And I actually found it really interesting when you think about that as like a girl, because I would say as a generalization that a lot of girls seem to act and feel more in tandem with their friends. Like I know like we talk about like, you know, there's that whole stereotype like in like fucking The Hangover, like wolf pack for like male groups of friends. I actually tend to think of that more like girls, you know, like your stereotypical thing. Like, do you get what I'm getting at? Like,
oh, definitely.
Yeah, like
I
stick
think this
together.
this is even like it kind of follows on to the idea that, like you said, American werewolf in London,
Yeah,
and Teen Wolf, and all those kind of things. You know, the Wolfman have all predominantly focused in the male spectrum of things. Yeah, and then this film kind of almost comes out of the blue, and you realize it makes so much more sense.
Perfect sense.
Like, because people have obviously always linked menstrual cycles and lunar cycles together. And then you just watch this film and it's kind of like, at no point did I question but it was more, as I said, I know it's probably not the best comparison, but comparing it to Teen Wolf, the film, not the series, obviously it did make sense, you know, the inherent aggression and the growth of hair and things like that with boys. But then you look at it and you realize the same thing happens to women.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just because it's such a male inherent trait, people ignore it and they brush it off. And I think that's so apparent in this film because, again, they don't do it in the best way, but her mom does try to engage a conversation about what's going on with Ginger, and Ginger and her sister both do their best to hide it. Like, Ginger literally says to Bridget, I can't go to the hospital after the initial attack because I don't want mom to find out.
It's awful because it's like they literally fear their periods. It's like, do they fear womanhood or do they fear being considered the norm? Probably both. And I think
just general fear of your body's doing something it's never done before.
Oh yeah, and I would also actually say a big part of it is fear of male attention, because in multiple points in this film they feel disgusted by male attention. You know how like Ginger covers up Bridget, how Bridget points out to Ginger that the guys are staring at her. I think it's really interesting that that's the whole thing. And then when Ginger realizes that actually this power is great is when she kind of starts to actually come into her own. So this film has like multiple viewpoints on embracing your sexuality. Like it doesn't have this like clear binary about it.
I think also, like what you were just talking about, like one of the most predominant scenes of Ginger seemingly embracing her sexuality is obviously when she walks down the hallway.
Oh, iconic.
And she's wearing clothes that she didn't wear before. They show more of her body, and like yes, that is empowering, and if she feels empowered walking down that hallway, then she should. But almost the way I kind of read it was that because throughout the film this transformation happening inside her body, because it is a werewolf curse, is against her will. But again, you can't choose whether or not you start having a period. It happens, and once it starts happening, you can't stop it.
Yeah.
So to me, it was almost kind of like, it's like her hesitation before she walks down the hallway. It's almost kind of like adapt or die.
Yeah.
You know, like she decides that either she embraces this and she takes control of it, or it takes control of her. And it's a very difficult thing that I do think in real life a lot of women, people as like just in general, but a lot of women do go through when they go through puberty.
I would definitely say that, because I think that obviously there are many different ways to deal with it, but it's really interesting when you see how different girls take on how different cis girls take on puberty, because some will embrace it with open arms, you know, that like they'll happily embrace like their new figure, whereas other girls actually find it very disturbing. And I think that's really cool in that this film, the sisters basically show the two different options. You know, like Bridget is absolutely terrified. Like she's seeing it happen to her older sister and she sees it as something scary. You know, like her walking down the hallway and all. Bridget looks terrified. Like obviously she knows that it's part of her becoming a werewolf, but you could just read it as someone being terrified seeing someone, you know, become a woman. Like that's supposed to be a scary thing. You know, the idea of women embracing their sexuality and using their body. But for Bridget, but I mean for Ginger, it's just inherently a good thing. Like she's enjoying it. She's enjoying the ride. It's really cool to see. It's just really cool to see that it doesn't have to be one way or the other. And I don't think the film super points towards one being better, like one viewpoint. Not really. But I do
agree.
Yeah, I think that you could watch this film and you could just take away from it what you feel like, you know, like you could watch this film and think like, fuck yeah, female empowerment. Or you could be someone that's like, oh, the dangerous woman. Like, it's just completely up to you, you know? Which, obviously, the latter is not... I don't agree with that one. But, you know, you could go away with that.
I think it's so interesting as well that, like, one of the comments that are made about Bridget and Ginger are that they've come into their periods late in life.
Yes.
Which is really weird to me, because there is no timestamp on when it happens, and also the fact that even to this day we are told to believe that you become a woman when you start your period, and that makes no sense to me.
It's quite dark,
you know. Like, I was 11 and I would never view an 11-year-old as a grown-up, as someone who would experienced everything you were meant to experience by the time you are classed as an adult. And it just makes no sense to me, of how... And I think that's why this film is kind of interesting, because, like you said, these sisters represent kind of both ends of the spectrum. And it just kind of shows that, because one of the scenes is just after the Ginger is attacked, she ends up smoking weed in a van with a group of kids, and Bridget is literally left on the outside. So it starts to show the separation and the severance of the sisters' relationship. But in that moment, Bridget also meets Sam, who becomes, quote unquote, her love interest for the film. And again, to me, it just shows that no matter what stage in life you're at, whether you've hit puberty in the mainstream sense or not, you know, you will kind of end up kind of down similar paths in that way. It doesn't take for your body to react to really get there, if that makes sense.
No, I get what you're getting at. Like the idea that you have to follow a very standardized idea of what becoming a woman is in order to enjoy like empowerment and affection is super outdated. And I do think that this film, even 20 years ago, was aware of that. Like you said, it's like Bridget is not what, you know, many would consider is a woman, and even this film suggests it because she hasn't had her period yet. But it shows that she is still worthy of affection. You know, like you have Sam there. It's not like an outright love interest thing. We might like disagree on that, but yeah, but it's like I don't know. Like this film. It is interesting to see that they dissect the ways that defining womanhood is not. It's just not it's not something you should do at all.
Yeah.
How can you define womanhood? Like you said, like 11 years old, getting your period at 11 years old, that doesn't make you a woman. Neither does smoking weed for the first time, neither does having sex for the first time. Like none of those things make you a woman.
There's no like particular order these things happen in.
Yeah, exactly. It's I don't know, it's interesting because neither Bridget or Ginger is considered above or below the other. They're kind of kept equal. They're kind of equals throughout this, even though they're going through things completely differently. And I just really like that about it. It was interesting.
I agree.
I was like, what? I'm talking into a dead end there, but I know that I don't know, just something about the idea of like, you know, when you watch a teen film today, like a coming of age film, and there's
Yeah.
always like, you get your super girly girls and you get your more like, just, I hate the name, I hate the word butch or tomboy or anything, just because it's not real. Just, you know, you get your more and your less feminine, which itself is a bullshit idea, girls or women, and they're kind of almost like pitted against each other, like still to this day. I think, it's exhausting to see. So this is quite refreshing.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I'm trying to think of where to move to next.
I know.
You know, we apologise that this podcast is a little bit messier than the last one.
I even said to you before we started this one that I felt like I had messier thoughts about this film. You know, like if we even said we're like Raw would be considered the better film, but I feel like I have much less organized thoughts on this because it's a messier film in itself. You know, like it.
Okay, well, in that case then, at this point, we kind of just want to say that before we started talking about this, we realised that this was probably going to be a little less structured than our first podcast on Raw, because the film itself is quite messy, I suppose you would describe it as, and I feel like that's kind of where our thoughts went to with it. There wasn't a particular sequence or particular themes that we were like really adamant in bringing up. It was almost more like this film initiated more of a discussion than an analysis, I would say.
I think that's actually a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
It was more of like a thought dump, wasn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Like, whereas Raw, you know, we did kind of more go into the analysis of it and kind of scene by scene and the camera angles and the music. And whilst Ginger Snaps has its moments, it is more thought-provoking. Not to take away from Raw, because like we both agreed that Raw is probably the superior film, probably just because it was made more recently.
I wouldn't just say that though. I'd say the performances are far superior. Let's be real. Like Ginger Snaps is a low-budget teen film. So like as much as we can like analyze it, we can't, like you said, we can't exactly analyze the technical because there's no technical to analyze. The strength of Ginger Snaps is solely in its premise. Solely.
Yeah.
Like you could just give anyone this premise really, or the script, and they could essentially make a very similar film. Whereas with Raw, not so much.
It's like when I watched Raw and I was writing my notes whilst I was watching it, I had quite a lot I wrote about it, and then when I wrote it down, I thought I had quite a lot written down about it, but then when I did this and I watched the film, I didn't particularly write down that much, but I've ended up with a page more of notes than I did with Raw, because I just feel like it elicits a conversation more than Raw did.
I would want to hear people's responses to Raw more than Ginger Snaps, but I know that's solely because of the ending, whereas with Ginger Snaps I would want to have like a full-on conversation about.
Oh yeah, I mean, the storyline of Ginger Snaps is quite basic. Again, it's probably because of the year it came out. I don't know if maybe if we had watched it the year that it came out, it would have been something different. But since then, we've seen stuff like Raw and Jennifer's Body that have taken inspiration. So it's undeniable that it is pinnacle in the horror genre, because it has inspired and influenced subsequent films since.
Oh, definitely. Like even in just certain like in certain aspects, like the language that they use, I would say Diablo Cody definitely picked up on that, and also certain scenes. Like, you know, we were talking about the corridor scene. This Jennifer's Body, like, come on, like you can't not see that comparison. You know, when Jennifer walks down, and another one is like the doctor's scene. That Raw has a doctor's scene. Yes, it's completely different, but the whole idea of a confused girl going to the doctor and the doctor being fuck all help, I think that there's definitely some influence was drawn from Ginger Snaps.
Well, you say it's completely different, but one of the things we spoke about during the doctor's scene in Raw was the fact that it was probably the first time they drew attention to how these girls were seeing themselves.
True.
Whereas in Ginger Snaps, there's this nurse who, for all intents and purposes, has good intention. She gives a very clinical explanation of what a menstrual cycle is. And then basically her end response is, here's some condoms. It's it's almost like periods begin and end in sex, which we all know, or well, some of us know, is not the case. Like, there is so much before and after sex that come with, like, it's almost like you can have sex without having a period. I don't understand why the two get linked so much.
I think
Like,
it's
yes,
very outdated, isn't it? Like,
yeah, like,
thinking
yes,
that
of
you're not having
course,
it until your period.
yeah. If you are someone who has a period, you do need to protect yourself if you do not want to have children at this time against things like that. But it's like one of the things the nurses says when she hands them the condom. She says, you now need to protect yourself against pregnancy and STDs. Almost like STDs weren't a thing before. It's like some women don't get their periods until they're generally until they're in their 20s. You can still contract STDs before that, which is very highlighted in this film by the fact that Ginger passes on the curse to that guy Jason through sex.
Exactly.
There's no bite, there's nothing else.
Yeah. I couldn't tell if it was that this film had, you know, outdated beliefs, or if it was that they were intentionally showing people with outdated beliefs. I do think the latter.
Mm-hmm.
The whole idea of like STDs, oh my god, it's so interesting to see like how public perception towards them's changed.
Mm-hmm. It's even like you can talk about It Follows,
I was
for
just
example,
about to say,
which is a whole film based on STDs as a horror. And obviously there are no part of STDs that are not a horror. They are there is something that everybody should protect themselves against. But it's one of those things where, like, that's not related to having a period. That's not related to being a woman. It's about being a human being and be sexually active. If you're being sexually active, you have a responsibility to yourself and your partner to be safe about it. And I just think it was interesting to have this nurse, like you said, have I would again like to think, very obvious ignorance about the fact that like when Bridget and Ginger are sat in the room, they are talking about Ginger becoming a werewolf, because like they ask her about like hair appearing and things like that, which is a very common comedy trope used in coming of age films, especially within the supernatural, about things happening and being misunderstood to be just a normal everyday thing. And the nurse is like, yeah, it's fine, don't worry. And it's like, yeah, of course it's a natural thing, but we're still scared of it. We don't understand that our bodies are doing something they've never done before.
Yeah, exactly. It's like she brushes it off as being a normal thing. It's like, yes, it might be normal, but that doesn't mean it's not scary.
And that is something that I would like to think I took away from this film, and I hope that that's not just me reading into it, but that this film does kind of stand for that. Like, just because something is normal doesn't mean that it still doesn't scare you, and it's okay to be scared, because being scared, the thing with this film that it does, and it's a realistic portrayal, but it shows that fear puts you into silence.
Yes, that's
and you
true.
hide it. But then it shows the consequences of that if you do that, it's not going to go away. It's just going to get worse.
And also with that silence, you also see things like, and carrying on with like the STD allegory, the guy that Ginger passes it to, he doesn't speak up, and look what fucking happens to him.
Oh, see, that's a whole other thing I didn't expect from this film. The whole idea that, you know, him and Ginger go away to obviously have sex, and in his mind that's all that was going to happen, and then Ginger all of a sudden becomes this assertive, aggressive figure, and he actually says the lines, I think it's something along the lines of, which of us is the guy, because all of a sudden she is overpowering him. Much like our last one, you know, this is a trigger warning for anybody who is affected by hearing or reading anything about sexual assault or stuff like that, but to me it very much played into the idea of male rape culture.
Oh, 100%.
because we see this thing happen, we see her becoming this aggressive figure, and he does literally say no, stop, and she continues doing what she's doing, and then the next day he turns up with these wounds on his face, and his friends say, what happens to you? And his instant reaction is to be like, oh, I got with one of the Fitzgerald sisters last night.
Yeah, like, I got mine.
Yeah. And he doesn't kind of recognize the fact that what happened was against his will, because he's the man.
It's also interesting though, because is it that he doesn't recognize it, or is it that he is trying to bury it? That scene has a very interesting take on consent, because to begin with, it seems like he's quite pushy towards Ginger, like he makes lewd comments and stuff like that, but then when it actually comes to that scene, she's the one being more forward. And it's really interesting to see that consent flip, because whenever we're told about like events such as that, like assault, it's made out like one person goes in with ill intentions, but not necessarily. There can always be a consent flip, and I think that's something that's really important to understand. I think that scene is a really good example of it.
Yeah, I also think it's a good example of, at any point where consent is withdrawn,
yes,
it is assault. It doesn't matter if up until the moment you were for it, as soon as you say no, and as soon as you do not want it to happen, if it continues, it is assault.
Exactly. You don't have to have a verbal no, whenever we're shown scenes where someone tries to stop something like that, it's there is a verbal no, and I think it's poor to try and teach people that you have to give a verbal no. Obviously there are many cases where you can't, it's so fascinating to me that this film manages to cover so many topics.
It does. And again, I do wonder if it was all intentional.
Same.
But regardless, these are kind of some of the things that people do take away from it. And like I said, this scene in particular, like this whole film, again, much like Raw, breaks down gender stereotypes for women, but it also breaks down for men as well, because everybody is at the same level of vulnerability to an extent, just because you're a girl doesn't mean you're obligated to perform a certain way. Just because you're a guy doesn't mean you're obligated to perform a certain way.
Exactly.
And that's kind of one of the things that this film comments on. And it does that through Ginger's slowly descending transformation. And I do say descending simply because it is very obvious that she doesn't want this, I would say.
I don't know, because she does somewhat. It's torn, isn't it? Because it shows moments where she does and moments where she doesn't.
I think it's just simply because it does boil down at the end of the day. And I think one of the reasons I had such an issue with the ending was because it very much fell into the horror trope of good versus evil.
Yeah, I find like the ending does such a disservice to the whole of the film.
Like I said to Lyanna before we started recording, that I would have much preferred it because obviously Bridget became infected, if both of the sisters had transformed and then run away together, separated themselves from a society that never truly understood them anyway. And I was very disappointed that it basically became Bridget became the heroine and she destroyed the evil. And it was a little bit of an emotional ending, because you have to remember she's basically just killed her sister. And I do know that there are 2 subsequent films after this, but I haven't seen them.
I think we are in agreement. Do not watch.
Yeah. But I just found the ending quite disappointing, considering everything it had built up to.
Yeah.
I think from maybe the party scene in the greenhouse onwards, it started to disappoint me, because it started to fall more into the horror tropes, which again you could argue is a product of its time, and the fact that at the end of the day, unlike Raw, it did set out to be a horror film.
And not just that, a teen film.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we've all, it's about a teenager, but its primary audience isn't teens, you know, whereas with this it is very clearly targeted towards teenagers, which
Mm-hmm.
means that it's hard because although it wasn't that well received to begin with, they probably didn't want to further alienate any audience they might get by doing some kind of crazy out there ending.
Yeah, I think they were probably also forced into the idea of good conquering evil in the end, because this, like we said at the beginning, this film faced so much controversy before it even came out
Mm-hmm.
because of what it was representing and what it contained, that I think they needed to have that, okay, the quote unquote evil has been defeated
Yeah.
before it can end, because that is literally the last. There's no, like, it doesn't, Bridget doesn't kill Ginger and then there's a funeral for her where she mourns her sister.
Mm-hmm.
There's no aftermath. There is just the death of Ginger, and it's almost like it kind of goes against what it was trying to say, and Ginger becomes this completely animalistic creature that has to be destroyed.
Yeah. Well, I do think they just wrote themselves into a corner completely. I think
Yeah.
they loaded this film with so many themes, which I do love. I love that it tries to do this, but I think it got a bit brave. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
it put a bit too much on its plate. So no matter what ending they did, it was gonna fall short of giving a proper conclusion to one of those themes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think somehow they managed to fall short of all of them.
I think this is one of the things that we kind of spoke about briefly in our first episode, that one of the things Raw was able to overcome was the stagnant, stereotypical end of horrors, where things either end on a very obvious cliffhanger or they have a happy ending resolution.
Yeah.
And Raw was kind of able to transcend this by giving us an ending we just didn't expect.
It's just I'm telling you, it's so rare that a horror film just nails it, you know? Like the
Yeah.
only one I can think of other than this, which I truly like, than Raw, I mean, that I truly love is The Witch. And it's because you kind
Mm-hmm.
of get that ending where like, holy fuck, I didn't even know I wanted this until I saw it. And it's the thing is, it is really hard to do that with any film, let alone a horror film.
Yeah.
So you
Oh,
can't even blame
definitely.
them.
Like, I think we briefly mentioned last time that everybody knows the endings are the hardest thing to write,
Yes.
because they are annoyingly the last thing that will stay with you. It doesn't matter how good, how phenomenal the film, book, TV series was, if the ending does not match up to the pace that was
Mm-hmm.
set, that's all you remember.
Oh, Sky, just say Game of Thrones.
That is one example, but it is not alone. It is not alone in that there are a lot of things.
It's
To
just,
be fair, I can't particularly, not that every single ending of every media has let me down, but I can't particularly think of anything that's made me kind of be like, wow, definitely didn't see that coming. Eventually everything kind of comes down to a wind down, and I think that's what Ginger Snaps did in the end. So I can't, again, because the year it came out, I can't completely tear it down for it,
mm-hmm.
because I at the time, I suppose they didn't really know what else they could do.
True.
You know, like you said, they wrote themselves into a wall. They literally kind of didn't have a choice with what they were going to do.
Yeah, I agree. But the thing is, what ends up happening is, you know, when you read like a really great article or an essay and they go through all these amazing topics and explore so many things, and you're expecting that absolute slammer of a closing
Mm,
paragraph, and it just kind of witters off. That's what this film felt like.
yeah.
Like, it just felt like, could you not just, like, your ending suggestion's brilliant, really.
Oh, thank you. Stay
I,
tuned for 2021.
I just, yeah,
Write my own films.
I just wish that, I don't know, I wish they'd just gone all in. You know, like they'd already done it. They were making a low budget werewolf as an allegory for periods teen horror film. Why the
Mm-hmm.
fuck did they have to go for such a, I don't know, bad ending? It's just, I don't
I
know.
think that was one of my main issues with it, though. It was not just because it was such a generic ending, but because the entire film was kind of so out there and it had such a strong message, whether you agree or disagree with it.
Yeah.
It was such a disappointing ending. Like, as soon as Bridget turned up at the party at the end, I knew what was going to happen. And I think
Yeah.
even the scene with her and Sam in the closet at the end, where he made a comment on the fact that she couldn't do this alone, and she was kind of like, no, fuck you, I can.
Mm-hmm.
You know, trying to push that idea of her being a heroine, was still really expected. And it's like, to a point where through the whole of it, I didn't particularly understand why Sam was in it.
No, there's no
not,
reason for him to be in it.
not to like take away from the guy, but I really didn't understand. Like, at least in Jennifer's Body, I can't remember his name, but the male interest in
Oh,
that
he's a
had a purpose in
sweetheart.
the end. Yeah. Whereas this guy, literally, his only purpose was figuring out the cure. And to be fair, Bridget could have figured that out on her own, or somebody, because like she literally came across the plant for the cure because of her mum.
But don't you love the fact that he was like a dealer as well? Oh, that's so good. It's so like
Definitely.
90s noughties, you know?
Oh,
Like,
definitely. I think, like I
oh,
said, one of the themes I wrote down during my notes was like youth culture, and the idea that one of the things that got me the most about this film
mm,
was that it's not a particularly long film. It's probably
hmm
your average length, but pretty soon after Ginger is attacked, they're all like, "It's werewolves. It's definitely werewolves. No other explanation. It's werewolves." Like, when you watch films like this, they come up with every excuse under the sun to explain away the things that are happening, to a point where, like in zombie films, sometimes zombies don't even exist for people to not understand what's going on.
No, exactly.
And it just to me again was such a comment on youth culture, that one, they were all instantly like, this is definitely werewolves, and everyone was like, yep, you're right. And two, the way that they discovered the cure was because the guy was a drug dealer.
It's brilliant. It's so
The
brilliant.
way he brewed the cure was drugs. I was just
Also,
like,
I
fair
love
enough.
the idea that like the popular girl in school wants to smash the dealer. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
It's just breathtaking. It really is. Like, I, oh, I don't know. I just think like it's the most 90s noughties thing in the world.
Definitely, because I don't get it.
Yeah,
I didn't
like,
understand.
yeah, like I just think
Why?
it's just so funny to me that like, you know, you like, oh fuck, how are we gonna solve this lycanthropy thing? I know, call the weed guy. Like, it's just
Yes, true.
like he can solve
And
everything.
also, it fed in so much to the ignorancy of adults, of
Yeah.
how they just didn't, like, even her mum, who was trying to give in. When I say her mum, sorry, I mean Bridget and Ginger's mum.
Mm.
The way that she was trying to start conversations with them about puberty and sexuality, it wasn't until the just before the Bridget goes into the party to find Ginger that her and her mum are sat in the car, and her mum says it's all her fault. And as far as I'm aware, her mum obviously had no idea about the supernatural element of things.
Yeah.
So I read it as, you know, her mum basically being like, I should have been more hands on with this.
Yeah.
This is why you know, Ginger became who she is. And also, something that I didn't really even register until I think I was writing about it afterwards, but that her mom turns around and she's kind of like, after she finds the body of the girl that neither sister killed, but she just died and they had to cover it up, their mom's just like, we'll burn the house and we'll run away. I fucking love it, because I'm not gonna lie, my mom said the same thing to me in the past. She's turned around and told me that, like, you know, she's one of them mama bears that will protect, like, fiercely protect her children. And it was just so interesting to see that in a character who, up until that point, was pretty much your Stepford wife.
Yeah,
You
like
know,
that 180 is just fabulous, you know?
yeah, and I think it just shows again that, I don't know, I think to me it just kind of showed that despite era and circumstance, we do all kind of know and we do all understand. and we have that connection. It's just the way society portrays things that makes us think that we don't.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, I get that.
I don't know if that sounds too hippy dippy, but I just thought it was really interesting that they had that moment with the mum, because also I noticed that their dad has like maybe like one line throughout the whole film.
I love that, to be quite frank with you.
But it's true. I think like one of the only comments he has is when they're talking about periods at the table, and he's like, "Stop."
Yeah.
And again, I think it's just a comment on how this kind of talk should be normalized, because if as soon as you, like I said, you bring up period talk, people of, again, all genders are like, "Oh no, don't, stop it, disgusting." Why is it disgusting?
Yeah, it should. It just boils down to the fact that so many people get them, so how is it still so taboo? Like, obviously we're fighting against it, but we still get period ads where the like blood is blue. Like, this is just getting ridiculous now, you know? like it's ridiculous when you think about having to, I know I've said this a million times already, but it's ridiculous that to talk about it you have to make a film about fucking werewolves. It's just crazy. And I love the fact, just on a sidebar, that there's so many things in this film and we just keep coming back to the period allegory because it's so unheard of.
It's like you said, to be fair, I can only think of this film and Carrie that had serious, like, I remember when I watched Carrie for the first time, and I actually watched it with my dad because he's the one that told me to watch it, and he turned around to me and he said this was basically his introduction into women having periods.
No way.
And it was just so crazy to think that, like I said, it should be taught to everybody, because
Definitely.
it is something that, you know, like you said, cis women go through, people who are born with wombs go through, and, you know, men find themselves in situations where they are in relationships, they'll have to deal with it because of that, and they shouldn't feel embarrassed.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's not just doing a disservice to people who have periods, it's doing a disservice to the people who are close to those people, you know, because they're not equipped to deal with it or understand it. So the more like films like this we can get, and, you know, the one day we eventually get a film about actual periods, it will just, it's just great. It's to be celebrated, really.
I would hope that it would get to a stage where, not that we get a film about periods, but we will get a film where it happens, it is dealt with, and then we kind of move on.
Well, yeah, like, say all these coming of age movies, like, how many are there where they get a period? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we've got Lady Bird, we've got 8th Grade, we've got all this crap, but when do we see that? I mean, it might happen. If any of our listeners can think of any, I'd actually love to know, like, genuinely, please let us know. But
definitely,
it's kind of upsetting, you know, like you just don't see it. It's like it's ignored. It's like it doesn't happen. And that means, you know, when you have times where things are really hurting, you don't want to speak up. It's taboo to even call into work and say, I'm in pain.
Yeah, definitely. Like, and I think, like you said, because obviously there are stages, like, you know, there are people who have endometriosis and polycystic ovaries and all these kind of things that can factor into it, that go through general, and to be fair, even regular periods without anything else, go through general debilitating pain.
Oh god, yeah.
And yet you're expected to continue as if nothing is happening. It's like if somebody was walking around and they were punching you constantly in the gut, you would not be expected to carry on with your daily life.
Exactly. Like, it's just, I don't know. I know this, like, podcast has taken a dramatic turn, but I knew it would when we talked about this film. But I just want to say to any of our, like, listeners that, you know, go through painful periods, that that's not something you need to feel ashamed of. Like, as much as, like, people make you feel like you can't talk about it, if you've got a painful period, fucking tell someone, I've got a painful period, can I borrow some medication? Like, I don't know, like, you know, in this film, in Ginger Snaps, that she's walking around clearly different and nobody says anything. That's such a brilliant, you know, allegory to periods, because when you first get it, you genuinely feel like everyone knows. Like, even to this day when I'm online, I feel like everybody knows, like everybody can tell, and no one can. Like, why is it so taboo that we're even self-conscious about it?
And like one of the most irritating things is if
Mhm.
somebody draws attention to it.
Yes.
If, you know, you're particularly irate, or if you're in pain and people are like, oh, know what that means. And again, it's even interesting in Ginger Snaps, where
Hmm.
after Jason has been intimate with Ginger,
Yeah.
he goes to school the next day, and one of the things he suffers because of it is his penis starts bleeding.
See, I've never even thought
And
about it in that way.
but this is it. One of the comments that his friends make is, "Oh, you on the rag?" It's like, why? Why is it made into a joke? Like, it's this
Yeah.
thing that it's like, oh,
Like, it obviously
terrible thing.
it should be made more of a casual topic, but not a casual topic in
Yeah.
a way that trivializes it.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, it's not even a fine line. It should just be easy. It should be common sense. And it's not until we get more films like Ginger Snaps that people are gonna just see it for the thing it is, just a part of
Yeah.
nature and life.
Honestly, until we actually started recording,
Hmm.
I thought this podcast was going to be very similar to our first one about Raw.
Yeah.
But the truth is, this film is predominantly about women getting their periods for the first time, and
It
the
really
things
is.
that they go through because of it.
The more you talk about it, the more you see it, don't you? Like, just
It's
this
true.
conversation now, I'm like, oh my God, that. Oh my God, that. You know?
Yeah. And I think maybe that's why, weirdly, we kind of had more notes to it, because it is more relatable than Raw is.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to add a point as well. The fact that we were both emo kids.
Yep, that is.
Yeah,
Yeah, I cannot deny.
that's one part of it. And I also want to add the whole aspect of her like glowing up.
Mhm.
Like I didn't like I wouldn't say I had like a glow up. I'd simply say that I had a very, very, very minor ugly duckling situation. Like I think that a big problem is that people think that when you hit puberty and you get your period and you're in secondary school, that you'll magically start to like look amazing. But that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't
No.
become like their full selves. Like, your body constantly changes. For the most part, people don't look the way they will look for most of their lives until their 20s.
Mhm.
And I find it really interesting, any kind of ugly duckling story like you have in Ginger Snaps, it's always overnight. And I know it's done for
Yeah.
dramatic effect and it does work really well here, but it's kind of wish fulfillment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I still buy into those stories and I fucking hate myself for it.
I think, no, I totally get it, because it's like you said, these are the kind of films that we were raised on.
Yeah.
And, like, even myself, I wouldn't actually ever say I went through a physical glow up, because to be fair, I pretty much look the same from birth, and that's not
Yeah.
even a joke. But I would like to think, like I said, I went through kind of like a mental glow up,
Yes, like it's not just a
in
physical.
the sense that the way that I kind of perceive myself has changed.
Yeah, it's like an attitude adjustment, isn't it, almost?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I will admit that kind of growing up in our more progressive generation, not completely progressive, because obviously
We got work
there
to
are
do.
still moments, yeah. But it has helped me to realize that whilst I still have my own personal struggles, if I look back on kind of how I was 10 years ago, I'm very different from that person.
Yeah.
That person wouldn't be doing this podcast right now. She'd be way too terrified to.
And do you know what? I think that change is great. It's always great. Like, change and growth is always an amazing thing. And that is one of the reasons why I fucking hate the ending to this film. Because she
Yeah.
dies. You don't get to see, like, it's like she changes. Who's to say it's for better or worse? And she dies. Like, she's
Yeah.
punished. It comes across as her being punished for it, which is
Yeah.
no way to end a film like this.
Well, her two options end up being cured or killed.
Yeah, it's essentially
Why?
she chooses to embrace herself and
Yeah.
dies for it, which
And
so
it's
goes
just,
against everything else in the film.
like I said, it conforms to the horror genre,
Hmm.
but it totally goes against, to, like I said, well, I say to me, but to us and probably a lot of people that watch this, the entire reason this film was created.
Yeah, like, it may not have been intentional to have those kind of undertones of the ending, but at the end of the day, that was the consequence of that ending, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, with a lot of films, people don't pay enough attention to the ending. It can completely
Mm-hmm.
put a different light on it. And
Mm-hmm.
as much as I want to love this film and would like to hail it as a masterpiece, it does have problems. Very much a product of its time, and I would say its major problem is its ending.
Yeah, I honestly couldn't agree more. I remember I was watching it and I was so invested in it until maybe the last 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't even have to watch it. I knew how it was going to end.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't particularly read anything on it beyond actually what I've written myself. Like, I don't know if there was an intention beyond it just being a general horror ending.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it did not work.
No.
For the message that the film was portraying, it did not work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even Jennifer's body
Mm-hmm.
had a ending that made more sense.
It just, yeah, no, I agree with that. I don't know, I wish I could like go shake the creators of this film and be like, you're already making something crazy, you know, like we said, just fucking go for it, so that we can say in this podcast, this is a masterpiece, go watch it, change your worldview.
I mean, still definitely go watch it, just be very conscious that the ending
yeah, I mean, like, not being funny, if people have gotten to this point in the podcast, surely they should have watched the film.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like we said in the last one, any of the films that we discuss, obviously highly recommend watching them beforehand. But if for some reason you decide to watch it afterwards, just know that this is still a film worth watching.
Yes, definitely.
Just don't be particularly expectant for the ending, because it just isn't. It isn't anything
special.
Yeah, it really isn't. It's very stereotypical for the genre.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I would probably imagine consciously or unconsciously they were pigeonholed into this kind of ending because they had to have a good versus evil.
Yeah, most likely.
For it to kind of get away with a lot of the stuff that it did for the time.
Which sucks for the film, because I think with, you know, a dramatic ending like Raw had, it could actually have a bigger following, you know, and be seen by more people. Like, I feel like I'm hailing this film as like a masterpiece or something. I'm not. I'm just saying that it's something that I actually think I really appreciate now that I've watched it again, and it's something that I wish I had taken more notice of when I watched it when I was younger. Yeah, I would definitely recommend this specifically to teenagers.
Oh, definitely. I wish I had watched it when I was younger.
Yeah, definitely.
I didn't watch it till literally last night.
Mm-hmm.
And whilst, like Lyanna said, I wouldn't hail it as a masterpiece, I think this podcast has even proven that it does elicit a conversation.
Oh god, yeah.
A conversation. It's a conversation that people think they're having, but they're not.
I can kind of get that. Like, a lot of, I don't know, I think a lot of things aren't daring, or not as daring as they like to think. I think this film had almost the opposite problem. Like, it was actually in some ways more provocative than they probably even realised, and that's why the ending falls flat as well. Like we said, it talks about so many topics, and that might not even be intentional. Which I think kind of works in its favour, because I don't know, you can smell it a mile away when a film's too intentional, and I actually think that's a problem with our era now, is that, like, diversity is very important, and I'm always for it, but I'm not for forced diversity done for diversity's sake, which is empty and hollow and devoid of meaning. I'd take something like this, which accidentally has themes to it, any day.
I think that's why sometimes even reading into stuff is a little bit better and interesting, because it just kind of shows the movement of generations.
Yeah.
That, like you said, you can show this film to one generation and think, oh, it's a film about werewolves, and then show it to another and think, oh, it's a film about puberty.
Yeah.
You know?
I know. I kind of want to show it to like a teenager now, you know, like the TikTok kids, and see what they would think of it. Personally, I think they'd eat.
TikTok kids.
Yeah, man. I think they would eat it up. Like, I really do.
I don't know if they give us the time of day.
No, they definitely would. They love this shit. You know, those ones that like post those like film recommendation TikToks, and they're like aesthetic films from the noughties that you should watch. And it's like the most obvious films.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate it. Like, good
I
for
mean, I'm not on TikTok, so I literally have no idea.
oh, get with the times, Skye.
I know, I'm sorry.
We're so old.
I know.
That's like, so now that like it sounds like we're wrapping up, I want to add another like near the almost final point, and that's
Yeah.
that it's really interesting having the realization last night that I'm not necessarily the target audience for this film anymore.
No, I know.
Very weird feeling.
It's actually the discussion we were having before we started recording that, like, we appreciate that, we are still young. We're in our early 20s, but almost by society standpoint, we're done with. Like, we're at an age where our lives should be settled.
I completely get that. And do you know what? I want more films for people our age. Because have you ever, like,
Yeah.
we can talk about this, like, in depth another time, but coming of age films are always like, this, like a teen film, or they're about someone in their 30s who's struggling. It's like, why isn't there one about people in their mid-20s?
It's like I'm still coming of age, and I probably will be until I'm 50.
Exactly. Like, I'm not saying you have to have a coming of age film for like every year of life, but I don't know. It seems to be like a forgotten about era, and it's a very weird era because everyone's. I know, obviously, at any time of life, people are at different stages, but this one feels particularly extreme. Like, a lot of people are, say, like living at home. Others are like having kids. Others have mortgages. It's very bizarre.
I do think there is a huge gap in the market for 20 to 20, 26, 27.
I completely agree.
Because you are right, it is that kind of weird stage where, like you just said, we have friends who have kids, we have friends who are married, we have friends who are actually weirdly divorced.
Oh, goodness.
Like, and yet there are us, and there's nothing wrong with it, but there's us who are still literally trying to figure out where we're even going.
Exactly.
I think that's why we'll get there.
I think it's why we still take solace in films like this, though. Like, I mean, our first 2 episodes of this podcast have been on teen films, or at least teen-focused films.
To be fair, I can't remember who said it now, but I read something ages ago about somebody who said that they didn't figure out how to be a teenager until they were in their 20s.
Yeah, literally.
And I do feel like that's kind of what it is.
Yes.
And that's why, like I said, we do still kind of hold on to films like this, because until something comes along to fill it, I don't feel, like I said, I feel closer to these films than I do to films like you said about being in your 30s.
Yes. I don't even know how to even begin looking for a film that would be targeted towards our age. And I think that's why I stick to the safe comfort of teen films. But yeah, you can only do it for so long. And there's only so many aspects of life you can tell through the allegory of high school.
Oh, definitely.
It's just, I don't know. I want films about our stage of life that aren't Noah Baumbach films, or Baumbach, however you say it. Like, I can only watch Frances Ha so many times, I need something more.
But until then, we have Ginger Snaps.
We do.
And yeah, like I said, this episode ended up being very different to how I thought it was going to be.
Same here.
But I think sometimes it's going to be like that, because there are just films that in themselves aren't particularly structured. There's definitely some stuff that we kind of missed over or didn't get to cover, but the same thing can be said for when we reviewed Raw, which is why I think it'd be really interesting to hear from you guys.
Yeah, like everything Skye said, really.
We would like to start a discourse between ourselves and our audience.
Yes.
Because these podcasts will not encompass everything that we think, who we are. So we would really like to kind of connect with our audience.
Yeah, for sure.
Through social medias and having, your opinion, your input. And being as much a part of this as we are, because the whole reason that we started this thing was because we just wanted to start a conversation.
Yeah, we want an open discourse about these kind of films. And we said this in the first episode, like, we would like to be introduced to new stuff too. We don't just have to talk about stuff we're already aware of. So if you have recommendations, please let us know. Like, you can contact us through the official, like, White Noise Twitter Instagram accounts, if I make an Instagram account. You can do it through either of our personal Twitter accounts. I would just love to hear more recommendations, because lately it feels that everyone's watching the same A24 films. So
Yeah,
I would love some fresh options.
definitely.
Mm.
Well, I suppose we will be wrapping this one up here.
I'll just end this one by saying that whilst it is not a perfectly problematic free film, I would recommend Ginger Snaps, because it delves into a lot of topics. It is a genuinely fun film to watch, and if you have anything better to suggest, I'd love to hear about it.
Definitely. I think it's one of those things where, like you said, it's not unproblematic. You know, it was part of the rise in emo culture, which we all know was not unproblematic in any sense.
Oh God.
But it addressed a lot of issues that people weren't talking about, kind of like emo culture did.
Yeah.
So it is worth watching. Just don't take everything it says to heart.
Yeah, definitely. Just like with any other teen film, really, just like take it for what it is, enjoy it, and I don't know, we might have a more, I don't know, heavy film in our next episode. We shall see. But for now, yeah, just watch a teen film about werewolves and tell us what you think.
Pretty much. See you soon.
Bye.